steam power, trains 3 and 4 were night trains with a sleeping car during this time. A few passenger and steam trains continued to serve for a lot longer. Listed in the 1947 SP timetable is train number 4 from San Francisco, 284 miles compass north to Eureka, California. The first 17 miles was by Pacific Greyhound Line bus from San Francisco to San Rafael in those days. This train is a special fan trip, using the exact same equipment, so it picked a better time for light here. The first car is a Railway Post Office car, or RPO. This train seems to be an all-mail and express train, with just a pair of rider coaches on the end. By the end of World War II, there were only 2 scheduled passenger trains, trains 3 and 4. Both trains featured departure in the evening and arrival in the early next morning between the endpoints of San Rafael and Eureka. That was a good arrangement for business travelers. This is where the San Rafael to Eureka line has a junction to the branch to Shelbyville, with its interchange connection to the Southern Pacific. From Ignacio, we'll run to Petaluma. This station on the right is currently used by the Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit. Petaluma was a Coast Miwok tribal name for hillside range. The SP controlled the half from Willits to the south. The Santa Fe operated the north half from Willits to Eureka, but the Santa Fe gave up involvement in 1929 by selling their share to the SP. Even though the railroad is called the NWP, the northwestern part of the name is one word, no space between the words north and western. Here, our excursion train picks up a helper on the point. Between the 17 miles from Ukiah to Ridge, the climb was from 610 to 1,913 feet. About the only way they could fully pack a train was on special excursions put on by organizations such as the Railroad and Locomotive Historical Society and others. The line had 40 tunnels and countless bridges and trestles. The scenery on the way to Willits becomes like a theme park ride of natural beauty. Reaching Willits at around milepost 140 was the NWP's connection to the California Western and a rich source of their lumber traffic. The yard here was always very busy in this steam era just after World War II, with lumber needed in huge quantities to supply the post-war suburban housing boom in all parts of California. The California Western Line ran for 40 miles from Willits to Fort Bragg on the Pacific coast. It had lumber as most of its revenue back then. It replaced many schooners that braved the Pacific Ocean coastline with lumber loads to bring down to cities to the south. It looks like our 1950 excursion train will need a pair of California Western locomotives to forward these passenger cars to Fort Bragg. This pair of engines will face some grades over 3% and lots of curves ahead. The California Western has become famous for its skunk train tourist rides in various rail cars. These were originally bought for all the people that needed transportation around this territory for business, acquiring supplies and work-related travel from some very remote places known more for logging and great scenery than much else. We'll leave Willits and jump far to the north and work our way back south to highlight a few scenes that will portray an earlier time. This location is around 2 miles south of Eureka, California. By 1955, SP President D.J. Russell really wanted to drop all passenger service on the NWP, moving freight only, especially lumber. That was his goal, to keep the line profitable. This is next to Humboldt Bay. Off to our left and over the water is a jetty with a Coast Guard station. Lolita once had its own small station as a flag stop. A Y is formed here at Alton from an abandoned branch line that ended at a gravel pit. About halfway to the pit is a rural community of Carlotta, where a rusting steel trestle crosses Yeager Creek. There was logging traffic here at one time by Pacific Lumber Company to keep this branch line busy. The station is gone, and all that remains are a few patches of track not yet engulfed in underbrush. Once the power is back on the front, we cross the Van Dusen River that flows into Humboldt Bay on the way to the Pacific Ocean. That's the Excursion Safety Committee cooling their heels. From now on, the tracks will follow the Eel River that at times brought grief to the NWP and the people scattered along the line. Today, many points along the Eel River have places with spans of rail hanging in midair over washouts and spans of rail covered by landslides. This is South Fork near Tunnel 37. This was once considered as a stopping point for passenger trains, with the bus completing the trip up to Eureka. That never happened. The 1964 floods wrecked a lot of track and some bridges. This type of trouble plagued the NWP in varying levels over the entire time of its existence. A closure of track anywhere on the line pinched off all revenue until it was all repaired. Island Mountain is where trains heading south pop out of a tunnel portal and then roll over the Eel River on a bridge. The tunnel is over 4,300 feet long. In September 1978, a tunnel fire started. Due to internal timber bracing, it burned for about 2 weeks. It took a year to fix the tunnel damage to a safe level. Meanwhile, the lumber companies found other means of moving their products south on the highways that had been built suitable for heavy trucks over the years. That lumber traffic would never be recaptured. Right around the bend is a workers' camp. Back in these days, passengers and rail fans could experience this thrilling ride into places that only the hardiest of railroad workers could live in their isolated communities. Whatever they needed came by rail. This is the turntable here. All that's left are a few rusting freight cars and tracks twisted and hanging in the air around several washouts. Nature is slowly reclaiming its own territory back. We are about 20 miles north of Willits now, and we'll dash ahead in time to the diesel-era passenger service on this line that came in the 1950s. Starting in 1952, diesels were rapidly replacing steam on freight trains. That was done by 1953. After steam ended on the NWP, the passenger trains 3 and 4, known as the Redwood, had SD7 diesels that were used with upgraded lightweight passenger cars. Later, in 1958, the more economical Bud car, number 10, was used until 1971. Let's follow SD7 5328 and others around for a bit. The two end marker lights were being replaced in this era by a single red blinking light in the 1950s on passenger trains and on cabooses. Notice the spark arresters on the two exhaust stacks. On another day, a southbound train emerges from Tunnel 27 to approach the rail worker community at Island Mountain. It looks like a scheduled number 3 train with some chartered fan trip cars added on. This is one last look at the living quarters here at Island Mountain. This is a train number 3 approaching Willits Station. The scene was apparently shot from the top of a freight car. Now back to San Rafael with a long train number 4 needing a pair of passenger SD7 diesels on this northbound trip that brings some new scenes of around 1958. This line featured lots of scenery through wild and undeveloped countryside that back in the past was inaccessible but for these rails. Coming up is the famous trestle at Scotia Bluffs To the left of the camera operator, and therefore out of sight, is the large Pacific Lumber Sawmill Complex and the company town of mill workers and their families living there. The mill in town is still there, but since trains have stopped running here, these tracks and their supports are nearly out of sight from underbrush taking over. Tiburon was the ferry slip and yard for freight traffic. Behind the SD7 diesel, the two-story building was the freight office. It's the only remaining building here, now used as a museum. The lone 1908 built steam engine number 112 still exists, but it resides at the Sacramento State Railroad Museum. She's a 460 in perfect cosmetic condition. This is the Corte Madera trestle and drawbridge over a waterway. Story has it that the opening and closing of the drawbridge was by hand cranking and lots of human muscle. This fan trip makes a stop at San Rafael. Our 1947 SP passenger train public timetable shows this is where San Francisco passengers got off of a Greyhound bus to actually board trains. The ferry rides to Sausalito for boarding trains had already ended on the NWP. The Golden Gate Bridge had made this shift possible. Next is another look at the Sausalito area in some nicer weather with SP's first diesel, dating from 1939. We'll follow this historic SP diesel while it picks up and drops off a few flat cars in Sausalito, California, and then runs north through some now unused tracks of the old NWP. In these early 1960s scenes, most of the freight cars to and from the NWP were routed through the SP's Shellville Junction and not rail barges. So the freight traffic down to Sausalito was just a trickle, easily handled by a simple 600 horsepower early switcher. The way you can discern an SW1 from later EMD switchers is the toolbox bulging out in front of the radiator. We suspect that the three guys in the Chevrolet rail car are heading to the Corte Madera drawbridge to crank the thing back down for the SW1 to cross. Sausalito had about 10 different spellings on deeds, maps, and documents, and even names used by post offices, until 1887, when the U.S. Post Office made it a settled issue using the present-day spelling we now know. Trains pop out of a 2,100-foot-long tunnel in a residential neighborhood. You can just make out the concrete tunnel portal in the background behind the caboose. At a place called Baltimore Park, the train cuts to the right on a bypass that will take the train to the place where it crosses under Highway 101 again. If you retraced this line today, you would be amazed about how built up all these locations have become. Next, number 1000 crosses over the same trestle just past the drawbridge and water channel. When NWP switched its remaining scheduled passenger service to the self-propelled number 10 RDC car, it only operated between Willits and Eureka 3 times a week. The number 10 originally had control cabs at both ends before it hit a truck and a grade crossing incident. It was repaired with just blank sheet metal. D.J. Russell was the SP president from 1964 to 72. Eliminating the financial losses on passenger trains that he had pursued as vice president from 1952 to 64 was nearly complete by this time, at least on the NWP. So here we are, some final views on the NWP of this tri-weekly adventure that had no equal in California.